This just feels like the 500th take. Deadlines mitigating my OCD, working on 3 things at the same time. I started streaming on YouTube. My name is Canete, you're watching Redraw, and today I'm drawing Serpentor. I'm a firm believer that in any given time you can only really work on 3 things simultaneously, and oftentimes that third thing has a tendency to suffer and probably shouldn't be on your plate at all. But anyway, that relates to my crazy week this week and how I barely managed to get this voiceover and this weekly video for my YouTube channel just under the wire. So I want to thank and apologize to Alan, who's doing all of my voice / sound design and mixing, for being so patient with me and getting this video in so late. If you don't know, I just currently started my weekly, right? I think it's weekly. I do it twice a week, Mondays and Wednesday. I just started my streaming efforts here on YouTube, so please keep an eye out on that. And if you aren't already subscribed to my channel, please click that subscribe button. And most importantly, because I've been hearing back from a handful of people that they're not getting any notices when I go live, please click on that notification bell and make sure that all those things are still turned on. Anyway, I just started my YouTube channel and my streaming efforts on YouTube this past week, and that really threw everything into a state of flux as far as what I'd gotten accustomed to in producing these weekly videos. On top of that, I don't need to mention my regular 9 to 5, but I think what it really threw into flux was my production for my creator-owned, soon-to-be crowd-funded mini-series, my comic book mini-series called Arc Athena. And so I've had a lot on my plate this week. I think just by accident I relegated doing voiceover and the production for this video into that third spot, and so there you go. I'm under the gun, but definitely, thankfully, under the wires. Thanks a lot, Alan. I really appreciate your efforts. Okay, so let's talk about Serpentor. I think what a great opportunity to be able to draw this character. Before I forget, thank you so much, IDW. Thank you so much to my good buddy Mark Irwin, who had enough faith in me to be able to execute this cover. Surprisingly, though, I think it was a failure to communicate on my part. I didn't quite lock down upon receiving the assignment exactly what the turnaround time was, and I think that's sort of, like I said, talk about throwing my weekly schedule into flux without knowing what that deadline was. The next time that I had reached out to them, or actually more accurately when they had reached out to me, just to check in how the progress was going, I had come to find out that the turnaround time was quite short. And so that ate into my all my other typical weekly projects, but it didn't make doing this thing any less fun. As a matter of fact, once in a while I feel like, and I think I should reserve this to those rare occasions, but once in a while I really feel like I perform better when I'm sort of under the gun like that, and I definitely was on this thing. This thing took about two days at most to finish, and that felt really good because it allowed me to sort of make decisions where I didn't have to overthink, only because I didn't have time to overthink, and it really sort of let me get to that decision making faster. And I genuinely believe that the work benefited from that. This isn't me advocating for doing crunch or working under the gun, but at least for me, sometimes it really does help my OCD, because I have a tendency to sort of overthink certain sections, and in this case, like I said earlier, it liberated me from that because I didn't have time to overthink. Again, let me be clear. Do not crunch whenever humanly possible, whenever schedule allows for it. Do not crunch. That's just that has no long-term sustainable value. Okay, that's my PSA. Working with IDW in the editorial, I just have a stroke. Let me start over. Working with IDW and their editorial staff was pretty seamless. There, I said that without swallowing my own tongue. Anyway, working with those guys was phenomenal. When I saw what the assignment was, and I saw Serpentor, my eyes lit up. I have, typical for a guy my age and my generation, I had a really great affinity for G.I. Joe, and when I saw Serpentor, I thought, this is going to be great. They sent me some reference, which I asked for, because this guy has had so many iterations in his armor, and I didn't know which one was the most current. I just wanted to make sure that, and I kind of suspected this, but it was later confirmed that they would have to send this out for approval for the IP to an IP stakeholders, which I think I would bet good money that it's Hasbro. Anyway, so I asked for some reference. They sent me a handful and asked me to just go to town, or just told me just go to town, have fun, and I really did my very best. So there's a couple of things as I'm looking through the playback here that I knew were going to be problematic. I knew there weren't too many elements on his costume, especially in this sort of like foreshortened perspective, this foreshortened pose that I drew him in. I knew there weren't too many elements in his costume that would help you understand volume. The belt was an easy one, but the thigh, or the plate armor on the thigh there, that was going to be, I think, problematic, and I needed to negotiate how to present that in the best way possible. And also, if you take a look at the way the scales are laid out, or at least the way I choose to render them, those weren't being helpful to that, the problem of legibility as far as the volume was concerned either, because I laid them out in such a pattern that it wasn't wrapping around the cylinder that is his thigh. So I needed to rethink about that as well. And if you scrub back a little bit, you can see me sort of adjusting the way I had already rendered the scales to sort of help along that way. I don't know if I ultimately landed it. Other things that were bouncing around in my head was, because the light source was at the bottom right hand corner, how was I going to help or how was I going to facilitate you focusing on his face? And that took a little bit of time to sort of figure out. There's a lot of pre-planning that happens before I should go into rendering, but I kind of had it in the back of my mind what the solve was, which was I was going to, if the upper torso closer to his head was going to drop into shadow, then I was going to use the framing element that is that snake sculpture behind him to really separate him away from to really create the point of focus and create the separation away from the snake statue in his head. So that's why you can see I pretty much blew out. And that was the area of the highest contrast, was that framing element of the snake statue around his head. So that was a lot of fun. I already said it earlier, but if you aren't already subscribed, please do so now. Notification bell. Comment down below. I'll take suggestions on what you guys want me, what you might want to see from me next. It's always good to mull around in my head. In previous videos, somebody suggested Mach 5 and Speed Racer, and I found that pretty compelling. So that might be the next thing, if and when I ever get my schedule in order. That might be the next thing that I end up working on. So I really do read all the comments. Appreciate all of them. Thank you so much. Funnily enough, you can scrub back and see me do a little bit of, in red line, do a little bit of explanation of my challenges in regards to those scales and how they suboptimally wrap around the volume of his thigh. And I did that while I was live streaming this past week, which was my first week live streaming, and that was a lot of fun. Thank you to everybody who showed up. You could also see me change the scale and a little bit of the position for Serpentor because, well, generally you want the main figure to occupy two-thirds of the cover space, and I thought there was I kind of drew him a tiny bit too small. Hooray for digital and the easy way to scale things up and down. But also, if you take a look to the left-hand side where he's holding his staff, if I had maintained the previous composition, I wouldn't have been able to render that so that you would know what it was. The head of the staff, the cobra at the head of his staff would have been completely off the page and just look weird if Serpentor was just carrying around some random stick looking threatening. I end up using that cape as a compositional element more than an actual cape itself, so that's why it, at this stage, comes off very graphic. The mechanics, quote-unquote, of the cape doesn't really make any sense if he's using it sort of, the way it's mounted on his upper torso as a vest. It doesn't really make sense how it hooks up to those bundles around and under his armpit. But I end up fixing that later when I take this thing to color. I wish I could show you guys the color process, but I didn't have the forethought, again, being under the gun and trying to turn this around about a day and a half. I didn't have the forethought to turn on the recording software for when I ported this over to Photoshop, and I did the coloring there. So I'll remember it for next time. Yeah. You want to talk about tight deadlines being a mitigator of my OCD. As you see me rendering that snake statue or that snake thingy in the background, in any other situation, I would have been so hung up in drawing cracks and little tiny pock marks on the rocks or whatever material that thing is made out of. This time around, I just needed you to be able to understand that it is a snake thing, and that it is at least for me, in the final image, that it was a framing element, so that at its highest point of contrast, your attention, your eye was going to go to that area. So thank goodness for tight deadlines sometimes, So there you go, little touches of detail here and there. And that's near the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching along. If you're not already doing so, follow me on my social media. You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Canete. And very soon, I'm going to be opening up my website for the newsletter and email for my upcoming project, my crowdfunding mini-series called Arc Athena. So I'll give you guys an update there. All right, thank you. See you on the next one.